important what the independent trade union do. Very important for the workers. Yes. And so it's not easy for the new style to hold them back.
Thanks, comrade. I'd like to take the chance to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting at Maximum 2012, tonight's meeting on Europe against austerity. We're going to have a discussion led off by the speakers at the top here, and then there'll be some time for discussion and debate from the floor. We're going to operate a speaker system for the meeting so that we can make sure that we get as many different viewpoints and perspectives from across varying different areas of the world or from the different areas of work that people are involved in. And obviously it's a very big meeting, so it's quite difficult to see all the hands and be fair in that way. So if you'd like to make a contribution at any point, if you put your hand up right from the outset of the meeting, so we're going to give you a speaker slip, and if you just jot down the details. We've got a selection of speakers from across the European movement. We're going to start with Richard Boyd Barrett, who is an Irish MP, member of the Dáil for the United Left Alliance. Richard.
The price of austerity, 4 years of austerity in Ireland, has been extremely high and is getting higher. There are now 200,000 children living on or below the poverty line in Ireland. 700,000 people, this is a population of about 4.5 million, 700,000 people living on or below the poverty line. We've gone from virtually no unemployment in 2008 to 340,000 people unemployed, 14% level of unemployment, with youth unemployment at about 25%. In the last 3 years, public sector workers have seen their incomes cut by about 15 to 20%, and swinging cuts in pay and income for workers right across the board. To such an extent that recent surveys showed about 25% of people in the country now only have about €100 disposable income per month they've paid their bills. We've had a vicious rain of attacks on vital public services and on the welfare state. In the last 2 years alone, 5,000 nurses and midwives have been cut out of the health service, thousands of beds have been closed down, accident and emergency units across the country have either been closed or have been threatened with closure, leading to, in the hospitals that are remaining, massive overcrowding with sick and elderly people left on trolleys for literally days waiting to see a doctor in an A&E unit. We've had brutal cuts directed at the most vulnerable sectors of our society, special needs assistance being cut in schools, cuts to care allowances for families with children that have disability or special needs, a whole series of attacks directed at single parents, their allowances, at various supports for them to get back into the workforce, and that's against a background where approximately a third of all families in the country are lone parent families. We've had cuts in rent allowances, such that now thousands, literally thousands, of the least well-off people are being faced with homelessness because the cuts in rent subsidy have come at the same time that a Labour government, or as a part of the coalition, Fine Gael Labour coalition, in June last year, without actually publicly announcing it, essentially introduced a new policy where no more council houses will be built ever in the country, completely privatising and outsourcing the provision of social housing to lease houses off the banks and the National Asset Management Agency which now owns the hundreds of thousands of empty properties that are lying idle, that were built by the developers in the property insanity that led to the crash in the Irish economy. So you have an obscenity where there are now 96,000 families on the housing waiting list, waiting up to 10 or 11 years, and this is now set to get worse, to get housed, while we have 230,000 empty houses across the country. Houses that are in the hands of the state, effectively, or in the state-owned banks. And yet, the homelessness situation gets worse by the day. We have about 70 to 80,000 people who are now nearly a year or more in mortgage arrears, completely unable to pay the massive mortgages on properties that have completely collapsed by about 70% in value. And all of this situation, which is dire, would in fact be a hell of a lot worse were it not for the fact that 200,000 people have left the country, mostly young people, in the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, literally, our government keeps saying we're not Greece, we're the good boys of Europe, or the success story of austerity, but in reality the situation is dire, but we would be Greece probably multiplied by 2, but for the fact that 200,000 people have simply left the country because there is nothing there for them. But as if all this isn't bad enough, and that is if like 21 billion worth of cuts that have been imposed, of austerities have been imposed in the last 4 years, there is much more to come under the Troika, the IMF, EU, ECB austerity programme that is demanding another 9 billion in cuts in the next 2 years. And when they finished with that, as a result of the passing of the fiscal treaty, another unknown quantity of billions of cuts that will be required to meet the stringent debt and deficit targets that the fiscal treaty demands that the state adheres to as part of the fiscal treaty. Now, the sickening irony of all of this is that the vast majority of the huge debt and deficit problems faced by the state did not result from the feckless Irish any more than they resulted from the feckless Greeks, as the narrative of the European ruling class goes. But in fact, all of this is being done in order to bail out the European financial system, the bankers, the bondholders, the speculators, particularly the German, French and British banks that speculated on the Irish property markets when they thought there was massive profits. Indeed there was massive profits to be made, and now are demanding that working class people, the least well off and the most vulnerable, pay back these gambling debts with vicious and brutal austerity, requiring the state to borrow approximately 100 billion to protect those banks, and then that has to be paid for with the austerity that is imposed by ordinary people. So Ireland now, like Greece, like Spain and Italy to come soon, is being placed in a vice grips of austerity in order to extract back the money being demanded by the European banking system in what is essentially permanent structural adjustment programmes of the sort that we would have associated with the ravages of what the IMF did in places like Africa and Latin America in the 80s and 90s. And it is worth saying there is in a country particularly which has had a history, if you like, of resisting imperialism and colonialism, that there is an imperialist and colonial dynamic to this, because of course if you're going to ram that level of injustice and austerity down the throats of people, you have to do it by trying to dismantle, do away with democratic structures. And indeed it is the regular response of our government when we attack them in the Parliament and on the streets with protests over the austerity to say we have lost our economic sovereignty, we're not in control anymore, we are controlled by the European Central Bank, by the Troika. They're they decide everything. The Irish government, the current Irish government, despite getting elected just over a year and a half ago, on the promise that they were going to do something about this injustice, that they were going to, the slogan the Labour Party used was it was either going to be Frankfurt's way or Labour's way, and if they had anything to do with it, it would be Labour's way, implying they were going to stand up against this austerity, this injustice of ordinary people being forced to bail out the banks, capitulated literally within days, and have betrayed, stabbed the people in the back, and are now enthusiastically, for the last year, imposing the same austerity that Fianna Fáil previously had done. Their one hope, if you like, their one message of hope is that if we accept all this austerity, if we accept all this pain, that Ireland will become cost competitive and will be able to export its way out of the crisis by having, cheap exports that we can export to our European partners and elsewhere. But of course, the reality is that as the same austerity poison that has been inflicted on Ireland and Greece has devastated the Greek and Irish economies, and that is now extended to the rest of Europe, it has the same devastating impact as becoming apparent across the European economy. The European economy is contracting, and so the export markets that they hope can, if you like, save the Irish economy are contracting, and therefore that hope is being choked off. When you make this point to them, or to the Troika, I actually had the displeasure of meeting, because they met the various opposition groups in the Parliament, they described this as a downside risk, in the sort of usual euphemistic, understated language of these technocrats. But of course, it's much more than a downside risk. It is an absolute racing certainty, because we have the clear examples of what has happened in Greece and in Ireland when you impose this shock therapy of austerity on an economy, where you suck billions out of the pockets of ordinary people, where you force hundreds of thousands of people into unemployment. You launch yourself into a vicious downward spiral where things can only get worse. And you move, as I think they are moving fairly rapidly, from recession into depression. And that is where we are clearly heading, unless we get off this austerity roundabout. Faced with this level of injustice and austerity, where is the resistance? Or is the resistance? I'm sure people want to know. Tragically, because the trade union movement is dominated by the Labour Party, who are in government, they are using every single bit of influence they can within the Labour movement to hold the organised working class down, to demoralise them, to tell them there is no alternative. And that, sadly, has had something of an effect to date. Not in any sense are workers enthusiastic about this, but literally being sabotaged, disorganised and demoralised by their own leadership. But on the other hand, where the struggle is not breaking out to a significant extent within the organised labour movement, it is breaking out everywhere else. Fights, massive fights to defend hospitals, fights of turf cutters to defend their right to cut turf, small communities across the country where their schools are being closed, taking to the streets, lone parents groups getting organised, mobilising, protests in the Parliament, and one of the biggest campaigns in the history of the state of civil disobedience against the Troika demanded household charge, which is a sort of regressive tax being imposed on all households in the country. We've seen an absolutely magnificent movement of civil disobedience, where more than 50% of the population have broken the law and refused to pay a tax, an austerity tax that has been imposed by the government. And the government is in quite a significant amount of difficulty about how to deal with this campaign of mass civil disobedience. And that has also found, if you like, that resistance has also found political reflection in a very significant growth of support for radical left forces. So that Sinn Féin, for example, are now running at about 16-17% in the polls. With the United Left Alliance, which has 5 MPs in the Parliament, but also has a number of other left independents that are in a thing called the technical group. And although we don't get individual poll what do you call them? Ratings for the United Left Alliance, specifically under the broad heading of independence, the vote for which and the support for which is mostly to the left. This group is running at 21% in the polls, which puts it only just marginally behind Fine Gael, ahead of Sinn Féin, ahead of Fianna Fáil, and ahead of the Labour Party, whose vote in a year has collapsed down from about 30% support down to about 12%. So there's a huge space opening up for the radical left, although we have a lot of ground to cover in order to move from where we are now to that huge potential that is out there. And I'll just finish by saying, what do we have to do to fill that gap, to that space that is opening up, as people simply cannot take much more? And I have absolutely no doubt that, if you like, the sporadic struggles that are breaking out over individual austerity measures are going to become generalised. We can't say exactly when, but I think very, very likely come the next budget in December, when simply people cannot take any more, and it is likely to be a massive revolt against this austerity in the coming months. The key for us, and what we are trying to use, our parliamentary platform and the profile that we've developed, is to be the people who are agitating for the struggle outside. Not getting involved in parliamentary cretinism, which sadly some of the left are doing, but in using it as a platform to agitate for struggles outside, being inside and outside the Parliament at the same time, and putting most of the energy and importance on the outside. And really it is only revolutionary socialists who are putting that emphasis, but it is absolutely vital, because while there is, if you like, a space opened up for the radical left, it is only going to be the struggle of masses of people, workers, the poor, the unemployed, all the groups who are under attack. It is only going to be them, through massive struggle and resistance, who are going to be able to oppose this austerity agenda. And we have to be the people who put the focus on building the resistance and the struggle from below to challenge and destroy, essentially, a system that is now gone cannibal and is threatening the lives and livelihoods of people at a level that they simply cannot take anymore.
Next speaker is going to be Buchholz. From the Die Linke party in Germany, where she is an MP, and she's also a supporter of March 21.
Comrades, many people think that German working class is backing Angela Merkel's politics against European workers. And indeed, there is a racist campaign against the Greek being lazy, not able to run their own country, against Southern Europeans, and of course there's a danger that the scapegoating works. But, and this is the first message, there is not only Merkel's Germany, there is a Germany against austerity and for international solidarity. In May, I want to point out 3 points. In May, left-wing groups, among them the Left Party, called to blockade the European Central Bank in Frankfurt and to demonstrate in solidarity with workers in Greece, Spain and other countries that are hit most severely by the austerity politics. The answer of the police was a 3-day ban of the city centre of Frankfurt. All political demonstrations have been banned. 1,500 people have been taken into custody. But 30,000 people responded to this criminalization and demonstrated against the austerity politics of EU, ECB, IMF and Angela Merkel in the city of Frankfurt. And it was a marvelous demonstration, a big demonstration in solidarity with the struggles around Europe and with a huge support in society. The second point I want to make, that is the reason why Merkel is strong, is not the strength of her government. To be honest, the government has huge internal problems, and it's only because the Social Democrats and the Greens, by and large, back the austerity politics. They were able to vote on the fiscal compact and the European stability mechanism last Friday. It was not the government itself which got the majority, it was just the support of SPD and Greens. And I think this is a shame for social democracy and for the Green Party, but at the same time we see that it creates immensely internal problems within their parties. There's a lot of criticism within the SPD and the Greens, and there's also a criticism within the trade unions. And so it's very important that Die Linke, of course, demonstrated together in Frankfurt and demonstrated against fiscal compact and European stability mechanism in front of Parliament, but Die Linke also voted unanimously against fiscal compact, ESM, and against all other bailouts and impoverishment programs imposed on European voters. I think this is very important, that we were the only party that really voted against all this bullshit. I think it shows that there is a space to win people to anti-austerity politics and to anti-capitalist politics within. The third point I want to make is the experience of German workers, because they already had made the experience of the politics that Merkel now wants to impose on the whole of Europe. During the early 2000s, German society was fundamentally changed by Gerhard Schröder's Agenda 2010, the blueprint of the austerity measures we face now in all over Europe. And now we have the situation that Germany, on the one hand side, is the biggest economy in Europe, but 30% of the workers are working in precarious jobs. We have a situation where 1 million people have to get money from the state because they can't live from what they earn in their full-time jobs. And 9 million workers earn less than €9 an hour. In some regions, they even just earn 3, 4 or 5 euros per hour, and there's no minimum wage in Germany. And this is why people know that the austerity measures that seem to be directed against the southern European countries at first, that they will hit themselves very hard. The fiscal compact that was just voted on last Friday in the German parliament forces the German government to cut 25 billion euros next year alone. And of course, people begin to realize that they will be the ones that will pay the bill once again. It is our job to organize against this politics, and I'm quite happy to tell you that we have the next possibility to mobilize in the left and to organize in the trade unions for a demonstration which will take place in different cities in the end of September, where the main slogan is that those who benefit should pay for the crisis, and this is a big chance to really fill this political space we have. I think there are two dangers in the German situation. First of all, we are facing the new general election in 1 year's time. At the moment, even though they are backing the austerity politics of the government, the Social Democrats and the Greens could appear as a left-wing alternative because they can have a more left-wing rhetoric, even though they do the same things the right-wing government does. This is a danger, and so we have to find a way of positioning the left against the SPD and the Greens as well, so that it's clear that the left is the only political alternative to Merkel. The second danger is the far right. We have been able to prevent coming up of a far right party so far because we had a strong left. I think the danger is not over, and so we see at the moment that the far right is reorganizing, is trying to build links with the far right in Europe, and so we have to mobilize. also to show people that there's a left-wing perspective against the crisis, and we have to win people to this left wing so that all the scapegoating and the racist ideas don't feed into a racist party. So we built the movement against the austerity measures in Europe. We built international solidarity. We built a strong left, and within this network of revolutionary socialists. And this is our contribution to fight the Europe of the bosses and the bankers and to create real international solidarity.
The next speaker will be Maria Stylou. She's a leading member of SEC, the sister organisation to the Socialist Workers' Party in Greece, and a leading activist in Greece against austerity.
I went to a meeting this morning. It was Ronnie Castro's meeting, and he discussed about the revolutionary courage. And I tried to think what I consider as a revolutionary courage in the last years in Greece. And what I consider, comrades, and I think is very important, is when the workers decided to have their first 24-hour strike after their government, that they voted en masse, threatened them with the memorandum. I think that's actually opened the door to what happened in the last 2 years, and it opens the door to what's going to happen in the next. I think that's important to have that in mind. I mean, things are not building from the top. They are building because workers are courageous. Even if they had a government which got 44% a few months before, they had a government that they voted for that. They had the bosses threatening them that, what do you expect? It's going to be a bankruptcy. You're not going to get the money from for your salaries. You're not going to have your jobs. You're not going to have anything. You are going to lose everything. So at least keep quiet. And it was amazing. They had also the trade union bureaucracy saying we cannot go for a strike at that moment. We've got to support the government. It's the beginning. It's a new government. And the left and the revolutionary left decided that they've got to act. They've got to act. And they started relating with the remnants of some rank and file sort of groups that existed in workplaces and some sort of left-wing unions on a first level, you can say. So they started connecting with that. And then, unexpectedly, for the aboves, unexpectedly, even for the trade union bureaucracy, the first 24-hour strike started. And it was a great success. It was really what the workers had to see in front of them and the whole society in order to believe that they had their power to move on and take everything in their hands and have the 20 days strike, and they have the unlimited strikes, and they have the occupation, and shape the whole society, and shape the political situation, and overthrow the government actually that they voted for, and then overthrow the next government, and starting building for themselves, and starting building the left. That's the way that the history starts. It starts like that, and the role of the revolutionaries are very important, and the role of the anti-capitalists are very important on those levels. And what we've got ahead, we can describe really a black picture from above. We can really describe what they are ready to do for us. But the thing is that how we can really start organizing the working class organizing the places which actually can shape all the society, can shape the future. I mean, it was amazing. If you go to the Greek example, and I really want to go not from a victorious point of view, but from the experience that got through those 2 years. From the experience really that how, I mean, when the workers move, they can shape, first of all, the political situation. It was a political situation that people thought that it was so stable that it cannot really change. The two big parties share between themselves the 78 or the 80%. And they thought that that's it. The rest of the left, after the results of the 2009 elections, they said nothing could move. They are still very strong. And within 1 year, the ruling party, PASOK party, the Labour Party, lost all the MPs, so they couldn't pass a law inside the government because they didn't have enough votes inside the parliament to pass all the memorandums. So they had to ally with the right. And that's actually the beginning of the crisis of the right as well. Because the right up to then presented itself that, no, I'm against the memorandum, when I come to power, I scrap all this, etc. And because they work together, I mean, the whole thing, it becomes such an unstable situation that in that period, after the new elections again and again, they've got between themselves just 42%. That's the way that the things were shaped. The first 24 hours strike and the continuation shaped the way that society resisted. It's not that all the resistance, I mean, it's not that only the working class resists inside the society. There are different milieus, youngsters, whatever you can think. They resisted what was happening. And they shaped you can say, the form of resistance. When lots of people, millions of people, started organizing, starting occupying the squares, starting having a tremendous movement of occupations. It was, in a moment, a false division. Are you going to be with the squares, or are you going to be with the workers? What of the two? And you see how the ruling classes and the journalists, etc., try to play on these divisions. But there were the workers, actually, that went down to the squares and demand that they all go to the next strike, and the squares support the strikes. And that's actually the whole attitude. There were two different things. They became one strong force that actually was one of the strong poles, actually, that brought down the government. It was more than that. It was a tremendous change of ideas within these two periods. Tremendous changes. People thought that, all right, parliamentary democracy is the best thing that we have. Those two parties are the only parties that can rule. We can challenge few things, but we still believe on their ideas. And in these 2 years, really, the ideas change upside down. On all the fronts. On the front of the democracy, if it's the parliamentary democracy or democracy from below. On the front that if we can believe to the EU and the euro, or you can scrap it, we don't care, we don't give a damn. If we can really are strong enough to put ourselves against Merkel and all these powerful bosses all around the world and say we don't pay the debt. All those things. And all those things, comrades, were so powerful. That's the reason I'm saying everything starts from one moment. Of course, you don't freeze that moment. You build on that moment. You grow that moment. You generalize that moment. and you're more on the center of what's happening. And that's the reason we are in a period where we can say the left is in the center of political changes in Greece. The workers again are in the center of political changes. And the revolutionary left this time has all the opportunities to work on three things. The first thing is to build really the rank and file that was, you can say, the beginning of how we went to that point now, to build the rank and file on all the workplaces, to insist on the anti-capitalist program, why we have the power, to stop only when we get everything, only when the workers get control, going through the different steps. And the last thing is to shape all the left and to put the pressure on all the left to be on our side, on our workers' side, on our side, on the revolutionary program side, on our side, that we can change society. But everything started because the workers started moving, and the left took the initiative. We've got to seize the time that it's there.
Speaker is going to be Callinicos, a leading member of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Okay, what's new? Best to wait till you decide whether you agree with what I say. You may decide it's a load of old rubbish. What's new in the situation in Europe? The crisis isn't new. It's been going on for 5 years, nearly. What isn't new is austerity. That's been going on for several years now. The new thing in the situation, even the very powerful class resistance that has developed in Greece that Maria was describing just now, that's been going on for that's been developing at an increasing pitch of intensity for several years. So that's not the new thing in the situation. The new thing in the situation is the political backlash against austerity, expressed in the French elections. Now, Francois Hollande is a snake, don't trust him, he's a social liberal, etc., etc. But what got him elected and what gave the Socialist Party a majority in the French Parliament for the first time since the end of the 1980s was the backlash against austerity. What brought Syriza from being, to be honest, a fairly poxy left party? I mean, a friend of mine who's a great advocate of Syriza described it as the party with the highest percentage of PhDs among its members in the world. What pitchforked Syriza from this relatively marginal status to getting, whatever it was, 27% of the vote in the election on the 17th of June was a huge upswell of political revulsion against the austerity measures. Now, not all that revulsion is good. You have the way in which the fascists are benefiting, Golden Dawn and the Front National, etc., etc. But nevertheless, the element of the radical left beginning to emerge as an articulate voice and force in opposition to austerity is the really new factor of the situation. And it's not just Greece. Mélenchon, the performance that he and the Front de Gauche had in the first round of the presidential election, what he did was to unify the vote to the left of the Socialist Party in France in a way that we haven't seen in France before. Even in this country, George Galloway's staggering victory in the Bradford West by-election at the end of March, that was a concrete expression in this country of the same process that is going on through the whole of Europe. This is the factor in the situation that we really need to respond to and understand. It's a very important and very positive development. For years people have been saying it's a crisis of capitalism, where's the left are nowhere, and so on. Sorry, friend, you're out of date. The left is bad. But to say that isn't just to uncritically celebrate what is happening. If we look at the politics that dominates this re-emergent radical left, it is the politics of left reformism. It's a rejection of neoliberalism and the kind of new Labour version of that, the what's often called social liberalism. It doesn't represent a revolutionary rejection of the entire system. Now, sometimes when I say this kind of thing, people say, oh, you know, you're saying that nothing has changed, everything is the same, reformism is back. Sometimes people say it's too abstract to talk about left reformism. These are really new movements. Sure, if we look at the kind of parties that are emerging, they're not a photo-fit reproduction of the old social democratic parties. I mean, for God's sake, Christina is on the national executive of Die Linke. You know, a revolutionary Marxist is in the leadership of Die Linke. That's, you know, not something that you would have seen, say, in the British Labour Party at its height. It is true that in these parties, I think, because they lack the kind of activist base that the classic social democratic and communist parties have, they lean on the revolutionary left, revolutionary organisations, to provide them with the organised activism that the far left can provide. But I'm sure Christina would be the first person to say that Die Linke is not, you know, a revolutionary socialist party. It's in many ways deeply embedded in the different reformist traditions in Germany. The same, if we look at Syriza, again, it's shaped by the very intense class battles and the very militant left that we've seen develop in Greece over decades, over a very long epoch of social and political struggles. Nevertheless, it is a left reformist organisation, and you can see this very concretely. What did Syriza say in the last election? It said, we want to break with the memorandum, we reject austerity, we want to implement a different kind of programme from what the parties of the memorandum are calling for, but we want to do this on a negotiated basis within the framework of the European Union and the Eurozone. Tsipras, days before the general election, wrote an article in the Financial Times saying, I will keep Greece in the Eurozone. I'm sorry, if you write an article like that in the Financial Times, you're not addressing Greek workers, you're not addressing European workers, you're addressing the European ruling classes and trying to reassure them. And there's a huge contradiction in that, which is an illustration of reformism throughout its history. There's a genuine drive to challenge austerity, to challenge the parties of the memorandum, but trying to do that within the framework, in particular of the Eurozone, which is the very mechanism that is being used to impose austerity on Greece and to atomise and fragment Greek society. That is a utopian programme. It's more realistic to call for full communism tomorrow, to be honest. Now, to register that kind of contradiction is not to engage in sectarian politics of denunciation. There's a stall outside UCL which has a placard saying, down with Syriza. That's nonsense. That's rubbish. When massive numbers of Greek workers, or French workers, or British workers, whatever workers, are voting for these parties as a way of getting back against austerity and articulating their rebellion about what's happening in their society in a positive way that isn't turning towards the racists and the fascists and so on, we have to welcome that and to be part of it. But the very limitations of the radical left mean that it is necessary for the revolutionary left, for revolutionary socialists, with the kind of politics and analysis and strategy and programme that is represented by the different organisations on this platform, the revolutionary left has to organise independently in order to help, as Maria said, to shape the struggles and to shape the resistance, to do do our best to build the new movements that the radical left is the political expression of, but to ensure that those movements don't end up in the old traps that again and again we've seen in the wreckage of different reformist politics around the world. Now, so we have to be part of these larger movements, but also acting independently within them. Now, what that means is variable. What it means concretely in different countries is not something you can generalise. There are people going around saying there's only one model we all have to build, usually because Syriza is the flavour of the month. From people often, who certainly hadn't heard of Syriza and probably were barely aware of Greece 1 or 2 years ago. Sometimes it feels like. People saying, build Syriza, this is the way to go. You can't generalise in that way. You need to look at the concrete situation of the revolutionary left, the workers' movement, and these organisations. We illustrate this on this platform. Christina is, as I've said, a leading member of Die Linke, as well as in a Marxist current within Die Linke. Richard and Maria are both in revolutionary organisations that are part of broader coalitions of the radical and the anti-capitalist left, and, well, what can I say about the Socialist Workers' Party? We're an independent revolutionary organisation that would like to be part of a broader coalition. Slightly pathetic voice of enthusiasm. Now, there's no way in which you can jump past the concrete circumstances that dictate the fact that what we're doing organisationally is quite different. Just taking this particular stretch of European countries represented on this platform. But although I'm talking about the differences, the common elements are incredibly important. The whole process of austerity, this appalling offensive, this attempt to cure the crisis of neoliberalism by radicalising neoliberalism, is cracking open. It's generating more and more resistance. And as that happens, the left is acquiring again a voice that has a resonance in very wide layers of society. This is an absolutely fundamental moment, and we have to be part of that moment, seeking in our different ways to shape it as much as possible so things do begin to move in a revolutionary direction.
Yeah, I'd like to say a couple of things about the Spanish state and austerity. Our situation is really dramatic. We have 25% of unemployment. That's over 5 million people, 5 million workers unemployed. We have between 50 and 60% of youth unemployment, 400,000 evictions in the last 3 years. We have a 20% of children poverty in Spain, and it's growing, so the situation is really dramatic. But I think they think that this is not enough. This is not enough for them, and they are not going to stop their measures until they have completely destroyed the Spanish social protection system. Because this is their main goal, to going out from the crisis, we don't know when, with a new situation, with new labor relations, paying less taxes, the richest paying less taxes, with weaker trade unions, and so on. But the point that I want to say that this is not easy for them. This is not easy, because if you see when the Tory Spanish party, the PP, was in the opposition, they were continuously criticizing the Socialist Party that were in government for the austerity policies, and they say we are not going. When they were in the opposition, they said if we are in the government, we are not going to make a labor reform. And it's the first thing they did, a labor reform against the workers. They say we are not going to cut the health and education budget, and it's the second thing they did. In fact, they got 20,000 million euros, and they bail out with that money Bankia, one of their banks. They say we are not going to raise the value-added tax, the VAT, IVA in Spanish, and they did it, and so on. Because this is the dynamic of austerity. We are not doing that, but we do it. I say tomato, you say tomato, but I say bailout. You know what I mean. But, so, the only thing is, this is a profound political crisis for them, and we see what is happening in Greece. The Socialist Party collapsed, Tory Party collapsed, almost the left is winning, and this is the way that they have for the rest of countries in Europe. So this is a political opportunity, an historical one, and we have to take advantage of it.
We're going to just limit the contribution to 3 minutes, and I'll go like that after 2, and then ask them to stop. Kevin will be followed by Pat Smith, so Pat wants to make her way down to the front.
As Alex said, the left is back, and that's the meaning of registered officially by the electoral results of the radical left in various parts of Europe. And for that reason alone, the victories or the successes of the radical left are to be welcomed, full stop. Now, there are second, third and fourth sentences that you want to say, but they're not worth saying unless you have the first sentence. And that's exactly how we felt in Bradford when we achieved the victory in Bradford West of winning 56% of the vote. We did not see that in respect as a selfish victory, a victory simply for a particular strand at the expense of others on the left. We saw that as a contribution to the re-engagement, the re-establishment of the left, of socialist arguments, of resistance in Britain, and it's something we believe that all the serious left can benefit from, and that's why it was welcomed universally by those who are serious on the left. It was an audacious campaign. I haven't got time to go through it, but in a sense it was an insurgent campaign, in that we were doing something very conventional, standing for a bourgeois parliament, but in a highly unconventional way, which connected with not only disaffected Labour voters, but people who, in the instances in Germany and North Rhine-Westphalia, have moved towards the Pirate Party because they see too much conventionality. It's not left-wing enough, but too much conventionality amongst the existing parties, including, in that instance, Die Linke in that state. Now, Alex characterises the developments as left reformist, and at a general level and as a first approximation, I have no problem with the characterisation that Alex gives. There is a history to the movement. We didn't just start yesterday. There's a history which goes back to the 1930s and so on, of movements of the left reformist parties, governments and so on. But for those lessons of the movement to illuminate where we are now, rather than to become an excuse for concrete engagement where we are now, we need to move, I think, beyond the first approximation. What I mean by that is you're talking left reformism, which is outside of the traditional social democratic parties. That doesn't change everything, but it certainly changes tactical relations between revolutionaries and those organisations, in my view. Secondly, there's a tremendous unevenness of experience across the different countries, and there's a great danger of overgeneralisation to say what fits in one country fits in another. Thirdly, I think it's important to look at what the actual political arguments are of these formations. Let me just say this lastly about respect. George Galloway characterises respect as real labour, which again is a first approximation, might not be that bad. It's certainly appealing to the sentiment for real labour. But it's real labour which is absolutely anti-racist and absolutely opposed to war. And if you look at the history of left reformism in this country, on those two questions, it's actually very important that those two questions are got right. The two of the greatest leaders of left reformism in Britain, Honoria Bevan and Michael Foot, both supported imperialist wars by the British state. It is simply inconceivable that Respect will support the bombing of Damascus or Tehran or anywhere else by the British state. That doesn't change everything, but it's important because it should guide comrades if we're talking about how these engagements, fraternal discussions and concrete united activities are going to develop, because this has been a one crisis, it's going to be a longer crisis. We have to work together because we as the left are all in it together.
In Scotland, the SNP government has acted as some kind of buffer between us and austerity. So we are not in any way suffering as Greece and Spain are suffering. We have not seen the magnificent fight back that we see in Greece, we see in Spain, and we see in other places. However, austerity is coming to us, and when it comes, they reckon that it'll come twice as hard. But we have seen a fight back, and while not on that scale, sometimes you have to look back over a period of a year and see what has gone on. And in Edinburgh, where I come from, we've seen an extraordinary year. A year ago, we, inspired by the Indignados in Spain, we had a Real Democracy Now! Campaign. I never knew there were so many Spaniards till I saw them in the street, and we joined them and were part of that, and that went on for a period of time. In the autumn, we were involved with a fight back against an attempt by the council, the SNP council, who were supposed to be against privatisation, the SNP council in a coalition with the Lib Dems, intended to privatise all our services. There was a fantastic campaign. Unison, the City of Edinburgh Unison Council had a campaign against it. There were anti-cuts campaigns all over the city, and we won. Over the winter, Occupy, through the worst blizzards we ever had, continued for 15 weeks to hold an occupation. We're facing, I think, a wonderful summer where many of these campaigns are coming together and intending to fight back. We have not had the fight back yet, but I have every confidence when we stand together we can win, and I have every confidence that we will be able to do that.
Maynard, apologise. Maynard will be followed by Gary McCarn.
I want to tell you a bit about the situation in the Netherlands. The Netherlands are part of the so-called core countries, very comparable and closely tied to Germany. The crisis hasn't hit hard yet in the sense of unemployment, but it's very much exposed to the debt crisis elsewhere in Europe. Dutch banks holding more than 200 billion euros of debt, Italian, Spanish, and Greek debt. There's, like in Germany, been a racist campaign against immigrants, but especially against Greece, with our finance minister repeating over and over again that the Greeks must bleed. Added to this, like elsewhere, they've been using the fear of the crisis to implement a permanent regime of austerity. First 18 billion of cuts, then now 13, and now they're talking about an extra 20, which is total more than 15% of the state budget. And it's starting to have a real impact on the lives of people, not only with families sometimes cutting back hundreds of euros a month, but also the insecurity with being more easily for layoffs. So far, it's led to a general dissatisfaction, a general distrust, but not strong resistance. There have been one-day manifestations, each sector on a different day protesting, often the union saying, we accept that there needs to be austerity, but please don't hit this particular sector as hard, making it very easy to play them out one against the other. But what has happened is a very strong political backlash. The government has fallen 2 months ago over the austerity measures, that they couldn't get a program around it. And now with the elections coming up, a strong polarization with now the SP, which is a left reformist but anti-neoliberal party, going head-to-head with the Tories and really shaking the establishment. That will be held in September. Now I want to end on a positive note about the resistance also picking up. We had a cleaner strike that started in January, a very precarious workforce with very high stakes in the strike. They struck for 3 months and they won. And they won because their campaign, their strike was very political. They said there's more than enough money and we should get it where it is. They went to the houses of the bosses with placards saying how many sick days, because they don't get sick days for the first 2 days that they're sick, how many sick days fit into this castle. And they really appeal to a general anger over banks, the bosses, etc. So this worked really well, and they persevered. After their strike didn't have initial impact, they started occupying universities. We helped them with this, drew in other sectors into the strike, and they didn't know how quickly they caved into the demands the bosses did. So the effect has been that the whole labor union is now shifting into gear, health workers coming into action, university workers coming into action, and we're hoping for a hot autumn, like hopefully for you here as well.
Contribution that we're able to fit in. I do apologise to the many people that did put slips in to speak, but there just isn't time, I'm afraid.
There was a contributor in the New York Times that asked the question, is fascism a European disease? Obviously the Americans being a bit superior, they've got a fair number of problems with racism in their own country to talk about, but it's a fair question, because another question that's also been asked, are we to return to the 1930s? In Europe, it looks like it, doesn't it, when you look at Greece. You hear about Golden Dawn being able to, on TV, attack two left-wing women on the television, and they can still get 6% of the vote in the days that follow. The same Golden Dawn that says that they're going to drag foreigners out of the hospital beds in Greece. You have a party called the Jobbik organisation in Hungary that's in the government. But you might have seen people in Britain on The Guardian, there's one village which is lots of Romani people lived in that village, with Jobbik people, set their people down there to patrol it with their jackboots and their whips, and I'm not exaggerating, and they terrorised the people in that village, but that's actually going on in a European Union country which is meant to be a democracy. And so I think that one of the big questions in the fight against austerity is to make sure that it's a fight against austerity and a fight against racism, but the two things go together, that you can't have one without the other, because it's so obvious. It's not necessarily going to be a rerun of the 1930s, because hopefully this time we'll make sure that the anger is directed and remains directed at the real enemy, and that the scapegoating and the racism isn't allowed to actually take hold and take the momentum. But it's not a battle that's going to be easily won necessarily. And you can see in France where Le Pen, his daughter, what's her name, Marine Le Pen, got 17% of the vote. The actual mainstream, Sarko, the Tories, basically did their best to ape what the fascists were saying. They did their best to out-racist the fascist racists. And even Syriza, from what I've seen of some of their stuff I've been reading on the web, I hope it sounds like it's true, but they according on the question of immigration, which unfortunately lots of left reformists are very confused about, they say, yes, it is an issue, but we can't deal with it like the Golden Dawn want to deal with it, by planting mines along the border and so on. And actually what they should have said is actually, no, immigration is not a problem. We welcome immigrants to this country. The truth is, they can get rid of all the immigrants from Greece, but they like, but the bankers will still be the bankers, they'll still be the ones sucking the blood out of us, the rich will still not be paying their taxes, and I think it's the duty of the revolutionary left, but it's always been consistent on this question to actually make sure that we arm the rest of the left to see that the question of immigration, the question of racism, the question of fighting austerity. And actually that will make us stronger to actually take on the fascists. And there have been demonstrations against the Golden Dawn in Greece. There have been sizable anti-Nazi demonstrations, which have been getting bigger, I think, and the state has been showing which side it's on by protecting the Nazis against the anti-Nazis. And so I think that's very much part of the movement. And actually, hopefully, will not be a rerun of the 1930s. And this time will work out different and be actually the socialists and the left that comes out on top, and the bankers that end up in prison.
I'm going to bring the speakers back to sum up from that discussion. I just wanted to make a few announcements. I've been asked to promote this fantastic Solidarity t-shirt, which apparently only costs £10, and the profits of which go to, all of them go to the Greek movement. So that's one way you can see what they're available outside the meeting, or from Red Stuff Shop, or from the, you can order them at the bookmark. the bookmarks as well. Other announcements are that the box office will be closed from 1:30 to 5:30 tomorrow and closed for all of Monday as well. Don't miss the Marxism after party on Monday at 7:30 till late. We invite everyone to the Scala, which is just up the road near King's Cross Station. Come along and listen to artists like Letitia's sadly from Stereo Lab and B Fiction, and maybe even continue some of the discussion from Marxism. If your ticket doesn't say plus gig, then go to the box office at the main gate and get an upgrade. It's only £5. Tonight at 9 o'clock there's events planned as well. Hamid Dabashi is one of the world's foremost experts on Palestinian cinema, and he'll be introducing a Palestinian film with The Time That Remains, inspired by his own family story fleeing the Israeli occupation, and that will take place in Roberts 106. And Hysterical Materialism is our all-time favourite comedy night this year, presenting, among others, Comedian of the Year, runner-up Joe Wells, feminist activist and comedian Kate Smurfate, and that will be in Roberts G06. So I'm going to bring them back in the order they spoke in. That'll be Richard Boyd Barrett first.
Yeah, well, I just want to agree with the Spanish comrade when he talked about how, against the desperate situation that is already occurring in Spain with the huge levels of unemployment, poverty, youth unemployment and all the rest of it, and as the devastation that we've seen visited on working class people in Greece, what I described the situation in Ireland, that these guys just don't intend to stop. They are out to slit our throats with austerity. There is no end to what these guys aren't willing to do. And I mean, Stefan was at his meeting. Stefan from the German organisation did his meeting as a series of questions which he's being asked, and one of the at the top of the list was, what the hell is Angela Merkel doing? I.e., is her strategy not irrational, even from her own point of view? And I think what we need to understand is, it is, but that's because capitalism is irrational. Capitalism is a mad system, absolutely mad. And it is bringing us back to the horrors of the 1930s unless we stop it. And it is absolutely clear that after the devastation they visited for the last 4 years has destroyed lives and livelihoods, devastating every aspect of our society, and they intend to lock that programme in permanently with the ESM, with the fiscal treaty, to asset strip countries, to privatise everything that moves. They are just going to destroy our society. And against that background, there is going to be resistance, and there's a growing awareness among huge swathes of people, in many cases a majority of people in societies, but certainly heading towards a majority of people who realise this is madness, it has to be stopped, we literally cannot take any more. I mean, I ask myself about Ireland, given what's happening there, that they plan another 4 billion of cuts in December, and I just shudder to think where these cuts are going to come from, given what they've already done to people. But they are going to do it. And it is going to, Ireland will bleed. And that is the sick logic that is now operating. Capitalism is revealing itself in all its horror. And against that background, there is going to be resistance, there's going to be radicalisation, and the space is opening up for the radical left, as has been said. But in that situation, we have a very serious responsibility. And as Alex said, and as others have intimated, there is no absolute blueprint or absolute model for this. And all sorts of situations are going to develop. Certainly that has been the case for us in Ireland, and I don't quite know how it's going to go. The radical left made a breakthrough in the elections, but to be honest with you, elements of the radical left have stalled. They've got over-focused on manoeuvring within the Parliament. They've made opportunistic alliances with people to the right of them who can't be trusted. All sorts of things can happen. And we have to be very flexible. We have to listen to people. And we have to experiment. But the one thing I will say is what can anchor us, what can navigate us through these turbulent times, is the focus on the working class and struggle from below as the key to unlocking this situation. If you don't have that, you will get it wrong. And I think that is the thing, and you need a party that is focused on that and that is constantly discussing and analysing the latest experience, the latest struggle, looking at the best examples and seeing how you can generalise them to move things forward. And that's why the vital importance, whatever of the broad alliances, the United Fronts, electoral or otherwise, that we're involved in, the absolute critical necessity of having a revolutionary organisation at the heart of that has that focus on struggle from below, and it is analysing and debating, if you like, the strategy and tactics that will be necessary to take us forward is absolutely critical, and why we need everybody who isn't in a revolutionary organisation to join one and become part of building that organisation and leadership, which will be critical if we are going to navigate our way through this situation and topple a system that has absolutely gone out of control.
Well, I first want to come back on the left party, and so it's a situation that differently from the Dutch situation or from Syriza, it is not the case that the left is profiting from the political situation at the moment. And this is for different reasons. First of all, yes, it is partially, like Kevin said, that the left seems to be like other parties. But it's not the situation in those parts of Germany where we lost most severely in the votes. In North Rhine-Westphalia, it is a very left-wing, very movementist part of Die Linke. And there is, I think, an important thing we have to understand. If we don't start to really build the movement in the center of our politics, then we don't have the basis for a left. The second lesson we had to learn is that there was a fierce media campaign against the left. It is the case that the media and all the other parties want to destroy Die Linke. For example, I told you, we were the only party, 76 MPs voting against the fiscal pact and the ESM. The only people that were reported about in the mainstream media were those minorities in the other parties who voted against it. And if there is anything which is a little problem within the left, that is put on the front pages of the newspapers. And so I think it is very important to say we can't trust the ruling class, we can't trust the media. It is very easily that they push you up like they do the pirates at the moment, and at the same time they let you fall like a hot potato, we say in Germany. So second thing, the question Alex put on the agenda, how to deal with left reformism. Our experience is that, first of all, we have to build resistance together, and we have to build an activist party. That is the main task we have to do as revolutionaries, and we have to build broad alliances within the left party for this kind of party model. And we just elected a new leadership for the left party in Germany, and it's quite good. It's an activist, trade unionist, and another woman who has been part of the anti-globalization movement for a long time. And they said, we have 3 core projects for the next time. This is fighting austerity in Europe, fighting privatization, and fighting precarious work. And I think this is absolutely the right thing, and we have to do now. The point the last speaker made about fighting fascism and racism, I think that is an absolutely vital point. We stopped the Nazis several times in Dresden, the biggest Nazi demonstration in Europe. This was possible because we built broad alliances to really confront the Nazis. At the same time, we know we have to fight racism, and there is a debate on Islamophobia, the relation, for example, with Islam in the Left Party, and it's so important that we are there really fighting racism and racist idea from the very beginning. So I think, to come to an end, we have different situations in Europe. We have completely different situations with the political formations we have, but we have the same task. Build the movement, build a broader left, and build a strong revolutionary organization. And I think you can make a difference where you are and where you work. And so I hope to see you again next year in another Marxism, this Marxism is great. It's great to see so many young people here, and I'm very glad to see even more young people from different countries. And I think it is very good to show that we have the experiences from so many different countries, and this strengthens our fights in our countries. Thank you very much.
Three things. The first is the fight against the fascists and fighting racism. I think that three points I want to make of that. The first thing is that the last demonstration that happened in Piraeus, that I was giving the example on Thursday, it was a huge demonstration. Had something like 3,000 people, out of which half of them were immigrants. It's the first time that immigrants are taking part in an anti-fascist demonstration that goes not in the center of Athens, but to smash the fascists in their neighborhood. That's a tremendous thing. That's the way that we link anti-racism and anti-fascism. I mean, it's not just, of course we are attacking the government and all the things, but how you build the links between the immigrants and the locals, so they can together be so confident as workers and as anti-fascists to go smash the fascists. It's in the same time here that we've got this meeting, there is a meeting on Katastroika. And the guy who has done the Katastroika was down there. I mean, it's bad that you don't hear him, but I mean, he was back down in Piraeus. And he wrote a big message on the internet. And he said that I never saw the fear in the eyes of the fascists like this night. They were threatened. So it's just the beginning, comrades. But if they fear us, you understand that that's the way to take them over and completely destroy them. So they got 7%, but we are millions. And if we build together, we can win and we can forget them. I mean, we can finish them. The second thing is with the left. Comrades, I want to give two things on the left. I think it's my experience from Greece is that the left did quite well in the elections. Because the workers fought and then moved to the left, etc. But also because of the campaign that the revolutionary anti-capitalist left was doing throughout the period. I mean, this wasn't against the rest of the left. Actually, it attracted lots of youngers or lots of people that were breaking from the Labour Party towards the left because we organized a campaign that insisted on two things. A, that the workers are powerful to win, to really overthrow the memorandum, and not just token overthrowing, but just they are able. And the second, because we were very clear on the perspectives. The perspectives that they can really forget the debt, the perspective that they can really have a workers' control, the perspective that they can break with the euro, etc. That gave such a confidence that when they were going to vote, they knew that they were going to vote for the left, even if they weren't going for the revolutionary left. And that's very important to have it in mind. We've got to have common action with all the left comrades, that's clear. But we've got really, at the same time, insisting on our perspectives, insisting on how the working class is going to win, insisting that the working class has a perspective to smash the system, insisting that there is another world is possible, and the workers could be in the center. So that's important in that period, really, to be all together in the common action, in the same time, really clarifying for the revolution, for the world that we are fighting for, particularly this time, that there are open eyes, open ears, and everybody really wants to listen, wants the solution. And the last thing is the problem of solidarity. The solidarity is very important. You know that. It's very important for Greece. It's going to be very important for Spain. It's going to be very important for all around the world. It's tremendous, really, to feel that you're not alone. In the beginning, they were saying, you are the only ones. The moment that the square started all around, it was tremendous. That was a beginning of the solidarity. It's important to have solidarity for Greece, for all the things, but it's very important that we build our struggles in each one place. That's the strongest solidarity. That's the way, the big inspiration down in Greece. That's the way that we can change the world.
Very quickly, on the question of left reformism that Kevin came back on, I think it's very important to stress that the fact that Tsipras or Mélenchon or George Galloway speak the language of left reformism is a fantastic strength in the present situation. You know, if the SWP had gone to Bradford West to run a candidate on the basis of the first four congresses of the Comintern, the dictatorship of the proletariat, dine with the Labour traitors and so on, you know, I wonder how many votes we would have got. 50? Something like that. However, as Kevin says, a very dynamic campaign that uses the traditional language of Labourism, but in a very sharp class way, and with the principal stands on racism and imperialism that Kevin is talking about, was able to speak to vast numbers of workers to be honest, usually the Labour Party can't speak to, let alone the far left. So the fact that it's parties that represent one or other variant of reformism that are articulating most effectively, at least in electoral terms, the voice of rebellion against austerity is inevitable and positive, and one shouldn't be worried about it, and so on and so forth. The one thing I'd say, though, is when you're getting 27% of the votes and coming within an inch of becoming a government, as Syriza was back in June, and may well, Syriza, you know, this government won't last long, I don't think. I mean, the Prime Minister was too ill to go to the European summit. He sent the President instead. The Finance Minister, fell ill at the prospect of what he had to do and had to resign. I don't think this government is long for this world, so Syriza may well come to government quite soon. In those circumstances, what Syriza is You know, whether it's this completely new, unmapped phenomenon and we don't know what it's going to be like, or whether it is, you know, a particular historically shaped form of left conformism does matter quite a lot. And one of the conclusions one draws from all that is the importance of the existence of an organised revolutionary left, not in isolation from these larger movements, not denouncing them in a sectarian way, organically involved in this whole process of radicalisation and revival of the left in the way that Maria has just been describing. The existence of revolutionary socialist organisations like that is really important. So I'll just conclude by repeating what Richard said. Appeal to people here, if you're not in a revolutionary organisation, and by that I mean really an organisation of the IS tendency, join us, please. We need you, and you'll actually have quite a good time if you join us.